Good morning. We're continuing the review and conclusion of Hemshech Ayin Beis, following the essay that I wrote on this topic. The essay is to be found at the group on our WhatsApp, WhatsApp Ayin Beis group. I'm opening it up right now, and I believe we're on page 38. Let's see. We're in the last chapter of this essay, which goes back to the beginning of Ayin Beis to conclude and finish the circle, so to speak, from the beginning of Ayin Beis through its entire flow, and namely discussion around Keser. Maimer, the Hemshech begins b'shar sheikdimu Yisrael nasel nishma. So Yardu Malachi Asharis, the Malachim came down when the Jews prefaced Nasa before Nishma by Matan Torah and wove for them two ksarim, two crowns. One connected Nasa, one connected the Mishnah. And that begins a discussion, a bunch of questions the Rebbe Rashab asks on that, compares it to other Maimorei Chazal that also talk about ksarim, and then begins a long discussion on what is Keser. So Keser is Rotzon. It's the essential interface between the first step, between anything. To begin, you have to want it. In this case, Hashem wanting existence. Rotzon. Keser itself, there are two parts, Atik and Arich. To understand Keser, the Rebbe Rashab went back to explain, explains in around 45 chapters, what is Pnimi? Keser is a Makif, Rotzon. What are the Spheres? And from there continues the discussion on this interface between divine and existence, consists of the Makif and the Pnimi, because the Makif represents, of course, the Pnimi is more internalized, but nevertheless, each one of them has both dimensions. Both the Keser has Atik and Arich, one that's more removed from existence and one that relates more to existence. And the Spheres have Eris and Kalim. And we continue this review, which in Ayin Beis spans a big part, the first half of volume 1. I reviewed it here in the essay, and namely, the big question that he asks is, okay, if Makif is bli gvul, Keser is bli gvul, meaning it has no structure, it's beyond ischalkus and hierarchy and distinction, in contra to the 10 spheres, so why do we say that there are 10 spheres in Igulim? Igulim is Makifim. And he explains, firstly, that Milo Mata, the hierarchy in Igulim, is only due to the level of revelation. But more importantly, the emphasis as Spheres there is the idea of emanations, not necessarily structure. In other words, what he calls pshitis, Spheres but pshitis, so it's a way of and to understand that, he goes into the three interpretations of Sphira, Mispar, Sipur, and Sapir, and then we finally came to a fourth interpretation, Sefer, which is the Etzema Eir itself, and the whole process is really elevating from the Spheres as they manifest in the Eiris Pnimim, meaning internalized, to reach the Spheres that are expressing the divine in its purest form. And that's where the real meaning of Sphira from Sapir, Behirus, clarity and transparency, is in the Makifim. And yet we still say there's Spheres in the Igulim. So he explained that in Keser there's two levels. In Arich you could speak about the number, the structure, because it relates to the structure, even though it's not the structure yet. Atik is completely removed. And those are the two levels of Hoid and Hodar, the levels of Keser and Keser Shebe Keser. So this has been a review. Actually, we're on page 39. My mistake. I said 38. We're on 39. So let me continue. Let's see here. Okay, that sums up till the end of 38. Then, based on that, he takes us back to the three meanings, the three interpretations in Keser that he laid out right in the beginning of the Hemshech. Keser from the word li zoir shtike, type of refrain and silence. That's going to be the highest level of Keser. Then Keser, like Makif, V'atara, like a crown, that's above. And Machtid, that surrounds Atzilus. And in that order. So the first interpretation is the highest level of Keser. The second is the middle level. And the third is the lowest level. And he says like this, that in general there are two tracks of divine revelation. One is Pnimi, which is it calls it Elohayres Ha'elamis. And the second is Ein Sof Gili Mina Etzem. And that itself has two levels. One that is completely removed from the Pnimi and one that relates to the Pnimi. And these are the three meanings in Keser. I believe we did the first part. So what we're up to is, we did the first Aleph Beis Gimel on page 39, that the Siva of Atzilus is the root of Pnimi, as it's rooted in the Blikvul. What he said, that Hashem, in his Blikvul, he envisioned a particular structure, the structure of the 10 spheres. So it's still really part of the Blikvul, but it's the Blikvul as it's envisioning existence. That's the first interpretation in Keser. The second, Keser HaTorah, is the Makif Atzmei, not as it relates to the Pnimi. But it's Makif, but it's a Makif to the Pnimi. It still transcends the Pnimi, but it doesn't relate to it, but it's still called a Makif to the Pnimi. And the third is the highest level, Shtika, L'mayla gam b'chinas Makif le'elmis. You can't even call it a Makif. Completely reflective of the Etzem Ha'er, in other words, as God sees himself. Or as the Eir is revealed to himself, let's put it that way. And we learned about these three levels throughout Ayin Beis. The Eir that relates to existence, the Eir that is already manifest, but not yet relating to existence, and the Eir that's completely just a reflection of the Etzem, God expressing himself. And that's where we stopped. So we're going to continue from the paragraph 1, 2, 3, 4, the fourth paragraph on page 39. Omnam, quote, all these are direct quotes, and primarily from the end of the section, the first section, Ayin Beis, volume 1, chapter 126. I think all of this is from chapter 126. So he says like this, Omnam yesh lemer, however, we can say, Kol elo agimah madregas, that these three levels, we could say that all of them, Hakol b'bchinas eira ein sof, Kamei sheba b'bchinas makif. That in general, being they're all interpretations in the word Keser, so even though, yes, we just explained that there's quite a distinction between Keser Shtika, which is completely removed, and Keser as it is surrounds Atzilus, which is envisioning existence. Nevertheless, Yesh Leimer, that all of them are Eir Ein Sof, how they're in a state of Makif. Even though he just said that the highest level is higher than being even a Makif. So he's now breaking it down further, that when you really come to understand it, they're all in the form of Makif. That's why they're all still the level of Keser. Shegam B'china Shtika, even the level of Shtika, silence. Silence means no expression at all. It means it's completely an Eir that relates to you, to no one else. Ein ze b'chinas atzmus ha-Keser mamish. That too is still not atzmus of Keser itself. Hainu b'chinas pnimius ha-Keser, which is pnimius ha-Keser. So he's clearly saying that there's even a higher level. Ki'im b'chinas ha-Rotzon. So even Shtika, which is the one most removed, is still calling it a Makif, because it's not atzmus ha-Keser mamish. Now, of course, that makes sense, because the fact that it's still a level of Keser and called Shtika, just as before the Tzimtzum, you wouldn't call that Atzmus. Atzmus is removed from all three levels. But in the Ein Sof itself, of the Rotzon, of Keser, these are the three levels. And he's going to explain. So it breaks down further. Now remember as I've explained several times, or many times, the point of all these levels is not just to tell us they're levels. They are stepping stones. They're all meant to help us grow. So the rungs of a ladder, if they're too far apart, you won't be able to climb. They have to be close to each other. So even though one is higher than the next, at the end of the day, it's all meant for us to be able to connect to Ein Sof. So if you think about it, that's why the Rebbe Rasha pushes so much and explains, even though it's completely removed, it's still not entirely. We're not yet reached the level of Asmus itself, or Asmus HaKeser as he calls it right now. So this is not, because you could say, one second, you just said one thing, why are you now breaking it down further? Because he wants to explain that at the end of the day, all the levels are accessible and are all meant for us to be able to reach the highest levels possible. The Eir HaEin Sof, the Eir of Ein Sof, now he's talking about the higher level. We're not talking about Eir of Ein Sof that's envisioning existence, the lower level, the lowest level of Keser. But Eir Ein Sof, even though it's a Gilim in Etzem, meaning it's an expression of the Etzem, on the terms of the Etzem. So even that highest level is still a makif to the Elamis. It's just a makif that is completely removed, but it's still a makif Elamis, meaning it has something, because why was God Megal this Eir in the first place? He doesn't need it for himself. So you have to say that even Gili Eir Atzmi is not for God, is also for existence. However, it's for existence to experience God on God's terms and not God on our terms. So this is a critical point. So it's like Hashem saying, let me tell you how I'm thinking. There's God as he relates to us. That's the energy, the divine energy that relates to existence. The Eir within Chachmeh, within Bina, the Asara Mamoris, Yehi Eir, Yehi Rakia. It's also divine energy, but divine energy that's speaking the language of existence. I'm talking about even in the Rotzon, where he's envisioning existence. Then there's the Eir Makif, the middle level, which we'll discuss soon, the difference between that. So there you now have a level that is beyond, but it's not completely beyond. And even the level that is completely beyond is also that existence should sense something that's completely beyond. It's essentially what he's saying, or at least the way I'm explaining it. The Oz Yeshla Kaponim Shachis La'elim is Vishtalshlus. So therefore it has some connection to the existence and to this cosmic order, which will come into Islapshus at some point, into Ishtalshlus, and nevertheless, and nevertheless it retains a level of Ein Sof. And in this Eir Ein Sof, Eir Makif, there are three levels. And here's how he spells them out now. The first is the Rotzon, as it manifests in Chochmah D'Atzilus. So it's basically Hashem saying, I want Chochmah. So what is that? Chochmah or Rotzon? It's Rotzon, but it's a Rotzon that's identifying now with a particular structure. And he calls that B'chinas Rotzon Goli. That's a revealed Rotzon. Hashem is revealing his desire. What does he want? He wants Chachma. Same thing. He wants Bina. He wants a world. And there, that relates to God envisioning existence. So it's not just a Rotzon, period. It's a Rotzon for a specific structure. Beis, that would be called the Keser, that's from the word Machtir, that save of the Chol Atzilus. So it's relating to Atzilus. Second, Habeis B'chinas Rotzon Nelam. It's not a revealed Rotzon, it's a concealed Rotzon. Shemislabish B'chochmah Nalama. Where does it manifest? In superconscious Chochmah, in a hidden Chochmah. It's there within the divine, but it's not yet expressed. Now you may recall, some of you, the end of volume 2, we spoke a lot about this, and we learned it also in Hemshel Tzadik Daled. All the levels, Lifnei HaTzimtzum, spoke about Rotzon Gole, Rotzon Nelam. You remember, I think he spoke 5 levels, if I recall. Makif of And this is already a Makif of Keser, meaning it's not as Rotzon is identifying with Chachma, it somewhat hovers above it. V'agimel, and the deepest, highest level of Keser, what he calls shtika, or hamtana, the refrain, the silence of Keser. B'chinas etzem harotzon, that is called the core desire, she'ein bo b'gili klal, that doesn't come in any form of revelation at all. So I'll tell you what we learned there. If you remember, we learned using a human example. It says in Gemara, Yivamis, Ein Adam B'loi Bayis. The language there is Ein Adam B'loi Karka. But Taisvus, I mean, we interpret it that a person is not complete without a home. He also speaks Ein Adam B'loi Isha. A person is also not complete without a wife, without a spouse. And as an aside, you may recall we discussed it. There's Rabbi Yosef Engel has a whole discussion. Is it the same thing, Bayis and Isha? Because sometimes a Isha, Ishti Zubesi, is related to home. Not relevant to our discussion here. That means that each of us is born with an innate need and desire for a home. But you don't see that in the person, especially at early age. But at some point in a person's life, whatever that age may be, that Rotzon will emerge. You know, time for me to buy a home, to build a home. And home here doesn't mean just a shelter. It means to build an environment, to build a structure, includes building a family. But even when that Rotzon comes out, it could also be the language I think in Tzadik Dalet from the Frierdiker Rebbe was, it could be years until you actually act on that Rotzon. So let's say at age 20, you said, you know what? I really feel the need to have a home. You even imagine what kind of home it would be. But it doesn't mean you're going to buy one or you're going to build one. It could take another 10 years, it could take who knows how many years. Then comes a stage where you say, you know, time has come. You say either to your spouse or to yourself or whatever, time has come, I'm going to build a house, or I'm going to buy a house. And then begins the process of finding a house. What kind of house do you want to build? I'm using build because it's just easier to understand it in the muscle of existence, creation of existence. What kind of a house you want to build? How many rooms? What type of rooms? Type of environment, etc. And even that is still not the creation. So Lifnei Tzimtzum, as explained at the end of volume 2 in Ayin Beis, and as I said that in the Hemshech Tzadik Daled of the Rebbe Frierdiker Rebbe, elaborates on it. So what do you see right here? That you can have one Rotzon that's in a state that's so concealed that you don't even know about it. That's the early stages of our lives. Then the Rotzon comes out, but it's still Nelam because it's not really being acted on. And then it becomes a Rotzon Goli, where, okay, now this Rotzon is now going to be implemented. And that in turn triggers and generates a whole bunch of steps until you actually go ahead and get the resources and the tzimtzum will come in order to create existence. Now, of course, Hashem is not bound by these levels. He could say, I want existence, and poof, there's existence. But again, Hashem wanted us to understand his process so we could relate to him. Secondly, he wants us to retrace the steps. That's why we were created in a way that we use these steps. And Hashem says it's because I also use these steps. I made these steps for you. And I made it in a way that you will follow the same guidelines. Just like we speak often about Atzilus, Bri, Yitzir, and Asiyah. Hashem needs those 4 worlds, but they are a logical process. First there's a vision, then there's an outline, Bria, then there's the shape and form, Yitzira, and Asiyah is the final product. In a similar way, these levels of Rotzon are a process that we can relate to, and therefore we can unite with Hashem because we understand him. It's just like we say the human being is created in the divine image, so we can emulate God's ways. God has Chachma, we have Chachma. God does Chesed, we do Chesed. Halachta b'drachav, we follow his paths. And the same thing in the process of creation, we also create in this fashion that we have these stages. So Chassidus says that the Rotzon, the hate, the Rotzon we have for a home evolves from the innate Rotzon, so to speak, innate, Nesava Kodesh Baruch Hu, that he desired dire betachtenim, a home in this world. And that is the cause that each of us also has a innate desire for a home. So this Nesava then in turn triggers and generates all the levels we're talking about now. And in general, there are 3 levels, even though you can break them down further, frankly. But for all practical purposes, these 3 levels correspond to the 3 levels in Keser. But what the beauty you see here is that even in the Lifnei Tzimtzum, even in Ein Sof, or in general Keser after the Tzimtzum, but Keser reflects that in microcosm, that you have the divine relating to existence in 3 different levels. One, he directly relates by envisioning it, what he called the Rotzon Goli. The second is Rotzon Nelam. There's a Rotzon, but it's concealed. And the third, Etzem HaRotzon, which is not even revealed. But it's going to be the root of the other 2 Ritzenis, obviously. Because if you didn't have the Etzem HaRotzon, you wouldn't have the other 2. So they're all there. The relationship with existence is very different. The highest is obviously on God's terms. The lowest is relating more on our terms. And the middle one is some type of mamutza between the 2. And as I spoke about in the last class, we'll soon see how this also connects to Yichud Tata, Yichud Elah, and the Yichud of both Yichudim, Das Tachten, Das Elyon, and the Yichud of Keil Deis Havayit, both Deis. So all this is going to come together with the end of Hemshech Ayin Beis. But meanwhile, we're speaking about it now on the level of Keser, the 3 meanings in Keser. Okay. I'll stop if there are any questions.
I have a question, Rabbi.
Yes?
There's no, Hashem has no process, right? I mean, this is all
Yes, he
just
does.
for
He
us.
chose to have a process, so we should understand,
No,
and we
no,
should
I
be
mean,
able to emulate
process,
it.
what I'm saying is a process indicates time. Like, how does a process relate to
It's called
time when,
conceptual time. Think of it
okay,
conceptually. It's not in days or
it's
years.
not
It's
our
not time
time.
as we know it.
It's not time on our terms, but he's
It's
giving
what
us
we call
this.
conceptual time. Conceptual time. When we say before and after, we don't mean before and after. We mean a higher level and a lower level, a cause and effect, if you wish.
Okay. Okay. Thank you.
Yeah. Any other questions?
Yeah, I've when we say Chachmi Me'ayin Timatze, the ayin is referring to the Gilui, the Rotzon HaGilui, that level of supernatural, super rational, and we're calling it ayin because it's a Makif, and that's why it's called ayin, or is there a separate level below Rotzon HaGilui that is ayin that Chachma recedes from there?
From my recollection of Chassidus, it could be either one. Maybe different places explain it differently, but the first interpretation works. Chachma Gluya is a Chachma, the first of the 10 spheres. It comes from Chachma Stima or Chachma Nelama, superconscious, and the relationship is like Ayin and Yesh because we're not conscious of it. So an idea falls into our head. It's like, well, where'd that come from? So Ayin would mean it's a state of nothingness compared to us because we can't define it. That's called superconscious. That's Chachma Shebe Keser. You could call it Chachma Shebe Rotzon because that originates from the Chachma within Keser, which is Chachma Shebe Rotzon. That would be the simple way to explain the Ayin. But it could be in some places in Chassidus may break it down further or elaborate more on that. That I have to look up. That I would suggest to look Sefer Lekutim Tzaddik, the entry on Chachma or the entry on Ayin even. Okay?
Yeah, and Gilgalta was, I remember we learned that extensively. Gilgalta was what level there of that the highest level
Galgal
of
the
Chachma
skull.
or the lowest level of Makif?
Galgalta is Rotzon. Mitzvahs related to Galgalta. It's called Keser. What level of these three? I can't tell you unless the Rebbe Rashab himself says. I can't really say for sure. It could be the first level, it could be the second. Not the third, but it's probably the first or the second. Okay?
So the interface of Keser with the structure of Panemi, our Eser Kolchos, is only through Chachmor, or there's
He's
Keser.
not discussing that. Here he's discussing how Keser is the interface.
Right.
Chacham is the first of the spheres. So in the world of Panemi, Chacham is the first emanation. But that's not being discussed right here in this section. It's discussed in Ayin Beis in other parts, but not right here. But it's correct to say Chacham is the first Gili, so to speak.
Would you say that Golgalto is higher than Rotzon? It's at it?
Golgalta is usually the level of
I know.
Rotzon. I didn't say higher. I said it's usually the level of Rotzon.
Because I remember we learned about Chochmas Timor that the Golgalto is reaching the Chochmas Timor be'etzem.
Well, the Galgalta is higher than Chochmas Timor, because Chochmas Timor is already a Chochma, Torah. And Galgalta is just a skull, just the bone. And therefore just pure Rotzon, mitzvahs. That's how we learn Galgalta and Chochmas Timor. But here, it's not spelling out where Galgalta is. It could be in the first level, the second level. It's not really so clear to me. It may become clearer as we go on. But right now, I don't remember. And I wouldn't try to figure it out because connected to, let's say, Neshama, Mitzvah, and Teira, probably connected, but I have to do more research to be able to say anything definitively.
And one more thing, in this level that we're talking about, the Golgalto, maybe we can.
But we're not talking about Galgalta. I'm just saying, Galgalta was not mentioned here. It's a question coming from Eliezer and from you, but he doesn't mention Galgalta here.
I understand, but Tainug and Rotzon, maybe they are not different in this level.
So I just told you, I don't want to speculate. If you want to do research, we do have to do research. I'm not going to start, since he doesn't mention Galgalta, I don't want to force it in here, because then I have to figure out which level it's at and so on. And why is it, to me, it's fine. But if it's relevant, the Rebbe Rashab will bring it up. Maybe, maybe he will. Let's see how it goes. Why is it like, what's missing here that we need to bring in Galgalta?
Thank you.
In each of these cases, Aleph, Beis, and Gimel, and Keser, and beginning with Aleph is the one that relates the most to the worlds, and then going to Beis and Gimel being the highest level that doesn't relate to structure. Is that correct?
Yeah, it's going Mamata Lamaila. Yeah, from the bottom up.
Yeah. Okay. And the second set of Aleph Beis is just kind of simplifying or summarizing the first set of Aleph Beis.
Not really, because he said Omnam Yashlemer that even the highest level is also a Makif. So the first Aleph Beis Gimel, if you look at the Gimel,
There's three sets
it's not even Makif. In the second set, he's calling it a Makif, but it's completely that's a Rotzon, not the Gili Klal. That's the distinction between the two. He's breaking it down further, like in a way.
Are you saying the second set of Aleph Beis is just describing the highest level or the lowest level? I'm confused.
No, all three. But he's explaining all three in the context that they're all Er Makif, where in the first set, he said the third one was higher than Er Makif. Read it inside. You'll see the Omnam Yashlemer that we started today.
Yeah.
Is coming to go further into breaking it down in a deeper way.
I see. Thank you.
Yeah. And now he's going to bring it back. to the three interpretations in Keser. V'zeh inyan gimel madreges hanal. And these are the three levels in Keser. Dihine. All this is the Rebbe Rashab's language. I just broke it into paragraphs and numbers, Aleph Beis Gimel, to make it easier to read. But it's the actual language of the Rebbe Rashab. The level 1, Tarach. Amud Eir. Remember, he said that Sevev Atzilus, he says, is Keser, 620 pillars of light. This is what's nimshach from Keser to the spheres, to the spheres pnimim, to the emanations. That's the first level, meaning from the bottom up, the lowest level. So that's the Tarach Amud Eir. Number 2, the Inyan B'chinas Keser V'Atorah, the second interpretation as a crown, which is above all the levushim of the king. The crown is on top of the head. Hu b'chinas Rotzon hanelam. That's the concealed Rotzon that we just spoke about in the previous set of 3. Even though it manifests in a hidden reason, there is a reason, but it's hidden. So it already does have, it's manifest in a reason, but it's a reason only known to Hashem, meaning it's a Rotzon Nelam. So compared to Rotzon, to Chochmah Gluya, it's a state of Makif, Chochmah D'Atzilus. The first level is already Keser as it's relating to Chochmah. Rotzon Goli, clearly relating and envisioning and relating to existence. This one is a Makif. And 3, the third interpretation, Keser, Li Zoyer, B'china Shtika, which he called before the level of silence. Keser from the word be silent. Zeu B'chinas Keser Shebe Keser. This is called Keser within Keser. B'chinas HaRotzon HaNelam Legamri. Not just Nelam compared to the Gili. You may recall he spoke about there's sometimes something is concealed, but it's only concealed relative to what's revealed. And ultimately you can reveal. But then there are things that are called Nelam Be'etzem. That's why it's called silence. There's no Gili at all. It's completely beyond Gili. So even though it is still called Makif Tishtaus because it's Keser, even the highest level, this is Etzem Pshitas HaRotzon, the core, shapeless, seamless desire within like the Etzem HaNefesh of a person. So just to give an example from us humans, a Koyach Goli is like right now my arm, say I'm writing something, it's functioning in a revealed way, this function called writing. What happens when my hand is resting and I'm not writing? There's still a koyach nelam. I have the ability to write. I'm just not writing this moment. And then there's the koyach, how it is in the etzem nefesh, meaning the nefesh itself has that power. Like we spoke a bit about koyach hariyah. There's the vision when you're actually seeing with your eye. There's the koyach hanelam. Even when your eyes are closed, you still have the power to see, even though you're not using that power. And then there's the etzem koyach hariyah and etzem nefesh, the very fact that your soul, as soon as you're born, as soon as the soul, well, I would say even before you're born, the soul has in it koyches, have faculties, but they're completely removed from any functionality. So Hashem created creation in the same way. Again, not that He needed it. For us, we can relate to Him on the level of Rotzon Goli. That would be as He relates to us on our terms. We're not talking about Pnimi now. Pnimi is the Mislabish. Here we're talking about the Makif relating to the Pnimi. Then you have the Makif relates to itself, like a Koyach Nelam. So it's there, but it's not revealed, but there is something there. And then there's how it is in the Etzem Mamish, which would be like Etzem Ha'oyer in the language we learned earlier, or what he calls here, etzem pshittas harotzon. But they're all rotzon. So this last section we just learned, in the beginning, the first set of Aleph Beis Gimel, he spoke about it in general terms. Now he's explaining it all within Rotzon itself, within Makif itself. It's not a contradiction. He just spoke about it first generally, and then he broke it into understanding that these are 3 levels in Rotzon, 3 levels in Keser. Ad kan l'shenei, all this is the language of the Rebbe Rashab, b'peide kuf chavov, in chapter 126, which is Seif Dibra Masel, the end of the Maimer, v'lo yochel Yosef lisapik tofrei Ayin Gimel. Because it's the end of a section in Ayin Beis that began from Shavuos Ayin Beis, and the Rebbe Rashab went all the way till the Parshas Vayigash, Tofrei Ayin Gimel. So he went through the whole summer, from Shavuos through the summer, through Tishrei, through most of Sefer Bereshis, Vayigash. The Rebbe Rashab concludes Lo Yochel Yosef and ends the section about Ksarim. The Hemshech would then take a break through the winter, because Vayigash is approximately December time, Tevis time, and he'd take a break and he would resume on Shavuos Tofresh Ayin Gimel later in the year. So a good, how many months? Shvat, Adar, Nisan, Iyar, Sivan, a good 5-6 months till he would resume the Hemshech with a Maimer of Shavuos Ayin Gimel, where then he continues Ayin Beis. We have it all in the book, in the Sefer, but if you look at the dates, you'll see Ayin Beis begins Shavuos Ayin Beis, basically 1912, goes through the winter of 1912, and it's already the new year, of course, Tofresh Ayin Gimel in Hebrew. Then through the winter, there's no Maimarim and Ayin Beis. He said other Maimarim, but not Hemshech Ayin Beis. Then Shavuos, 1913, he continues the Hemshech. Now this piece is 126 chapters, approximately 65 Maimarim. I'd have to look inside for the exact number. And that's the first section that covers about Keser and Esther Sfiris, and then comes back to the 3 meanings in Keser. Just giving you the lay of the land of Ayin Beis. We'll soon discuss what happens next in Hemshech Ayin Beis. Because remember, even though we now understand the 3 levels of Keser, he hasn't answered the questions. The 6 questions that we reviewed earlier of why Hagdama, Nasel, and Ishma, and all the questions he asked around that, and the number of Ksarim, he has not answered that, and that we're going to need to assume and speculate the answer. But by understanding what he does say, will help us understand what could have been the answer, what most likely will be the answer, which will come soon as the essay continues. But this is where, okay, so that sums up, as I said, the first section of Ayin Beis, and understanding the 3 meanings of Keser. Let's keep it in mind, because as we continue, we're going to start trying to answer those questions, but we have to still go through a bunch of introductions to get there to really fully understand the picture. I hope everybody got what I just said in the outline of the whole structure here.
So the first section of Ayin Beis is talking only about the levels of Keser.
No, but the 10 spheres and Pnimim is half of it. Keser begins with Keser. Then, like I wrote, from chapter 2 to chapter 45, I think, is all about the Esther Spheres. Then he goes back to Keser and Igulim, and Spheres and Igulim, 3 meanings of Sphera. And then the later chapters that we just reviewed, he goes back to the levels in Keser, Atik and Arich, and the 3 levels that were just reviewed. So it's the end in the later chapters here. The chapters themselves are, let me see. Basically chapter 83 and on, he starts going back to the Igulim, the Spheres and Igulim. But the 3 meanings in Keser is essentially starting in chapter 121 all the way to where we just finished, 126. It's all cited here with references. You can look it up easy to go ahead and look inside Ayin Beis. You can see it all elaborated upon. But this is the so-called, if you want, the roadmap of the first half of volume 1 of Ayin Beis. Okay? Are there any questions, or I'll continue? So now, bir b'derech efshir al hashaylos b'tchilas hahemshech. So now, based on this, we're going to start reconstructing the possible answer to the 6 questions that he asked in the beginning of Ayin Beis. Al pi kol hanal. So now, next paragraph, we're still on page 39, the 3rd paragraph from the bottom. Al pi kol hanal. Based on all the above, be'inyan hagimel perushim v'darges b'hamamutza de Keser, the 3 interpretations and levels in the interface of Keser. V'al pi hamavur lahalon, behemshech didan, and also based on what is explained later in Ayin Beis. Ad siyume, all the way to the end, be'inyan hagimel b'chinas bittul v'yichud, where he discusses the 3 levels of bittul and yichud. Yichud Elah, Yichud Tata, v'yichud Shneim, Das Elyon, Das Tachten, v'yichud Shneim, mitzad atzmus yizbarach. So I'm sure you all remember, we just learned about it earlier. So if you combine these 2, the 3 meanings and the 3 levels in Keser, and the 3 levels of bittul and yichud at the end of the Hemshech, ulai efshel levayet, joining those 2 things together, perhaps we can explain hashaylos b'tchilas hahemshech, the questions that were asked in the beginning of the Hemshech, be'inyan haksarim, shekishru malachi hasharis liyisrael, the ksarim, the crowns that the ministering angels wove for Yisrael, for the Jews, b'shah shigdimu nasa l'nishma. When they began by saying nasa, then nishma. So there were 6 questions, and we'll go back, of course, to the questions when we get to the answers. But how are we going to figure out the answer? By combining what he said about the 3 meanings in Keser, 3 levels in Keser, and combining that with the 3 levels of bittul and yichud that continue, and especially all the way to the end of the Hemshech. Because remember, if the Rebbe Rashab felt that he needed the whole Hemshech to come back to answer the questions, you can't just say that after chapter 126, he answers the question. He doesn't answer the questions. That means he wants to build it out even further, unpack so many ideas. And then, by looking at the end of the Hemshech, after everything we've learned, including what we added, Hamakbil L'Sheves, and all the things we discussed, then we can come back at the end of the Hemshech and say, Api, all this, we can now come back and understand what are the meaning of the Ksarim in the beginning of the Hemshech. It's basically what I'm writing here. So this is quite I don't want to call it, it's not a leap in my mind. To me, it's a logical conclusion. But nevertheless, when you think of it, it really requires understanding the whole Hemshech Ayin Beis, be able to go back and understand the beginning about the Ksarim. But to do so, we can't just jump into it. Ubahagdim, I write, in order to understand this, let us preface, Masha Mamshech Admur Nishmose Eden, Levayer Bereish Dibra Masel Vasisa Chag Shvuos Tafrei Shayin Gimel. Because the Rebbe Rashab gives us a few more hints. I mentioned after Vayigash that winter, 1913, the Rebbe Rashab actually traveled. He used to travel in the winter to Europe, to France, to Menton, or to sometimes Germany, but mostly France, south of France. When he came back, he continued the Hemshech in Lubavitch, Shvuos. So when he begins the continuation, the next section, he refers to these questions again, the Ksarim. So I didn't want to lose that, because the Rebbe Rashab adds some more nuances that can help us develop and understand what would be the ultimate answer. So that's what we're going to do now. We're going to continue what happens next in the Hemshech. He still doesn't answer the questions, but he adds more points. So what is discussed? The actual maimer, even though it was said 6 months later, but it's the next maimer in the Hemshech, after the Vayigash maimer that we just reviewed, chapter 126, Shasham Mavur Agimel Perushim V'Dargas Bekeser. There in the Vayigash maimer, he explained the three meanings, the three interpretations and levels in Keser, and the next maimer, which comes afterwards, he refers to it. So let's now review what does he say in the Shavuos maimer, Shavuos Ayin Gimel. Any questions just about how I'm structuring this? It's clear? Okay. So here's what the Rebbe Rashab says.
That was the other years also, that in the winter he did not take the Ma'amor in Ayin Beis?
Generally, yes, but not in Ayin Beis itself. After Shavuos Ayin Gimel, he goes into Ayin Daled, then takes, I think, another break, another break in Ayin Daled. But then Ayin Hey, it goes straight. The whole winter he said Maimarim. So Ayin Hey in volume 2, there's no break, whatever reason. So Ayin Gimel, Ayin Daled, there was a break. Ayin Hey, there's no break. Ayin Vav, there is a break because Ayin Vav, they left Lubavitch. Pasha Vayera, Tafresh Ayin Vav. So if you want the years, 1913, 1914, there was a break in the winter. 1915, there was no break. At the end of 1915, October, approximately, I would say, Vayera, or November, 1915, the Rebbe Rashab would leave Lubavitch never to return because of the World War and the upheavals. And he would go to Rostov, and he never continued Hemshech Ayin Beis after that. That's the end of volume 2. Volume 3, he never said, he never delivered. It's Chelik Shalei Nemar. So it's only written, volume 3. I've gone over this a few times, but it's worthwhile mentioning again, just to see how. So basically it began Shavuos 1912, went to Vayigash, let's say December 1912, a winter break for Ayin Beis. There's Maimorim that he said through that winter in Menton and other places. So we have them. There's a separate Sefer Maimorim, Tafresh Ayin Beis, Ayin Gimel, where he talks about those Maimorim. Shavuos 1913, he continued, went again till the winter of 1913, took another break. 1914, continues, and then just goes straight all the way till the winter, October 1915. Then he leaves Lubavitch, and the rest of Ayin Beis is written, only written, not he never says delivered it. Okay, good. So now the last paragraph on page 39. So what does the Rebbe Rashab say in this next Maimer after Vayigash, after he explains the three levels and the three interpretations and levels in Keser? The Maimer is called Vasisa Chag HaShavuos. So first, as is the usual custom of the Rabbeim, they bring a verse and they ask questions. So first, the Rebbe Rashab begins and details questions on the pasuk. This I'm writing. Good to note. Shagam Shailis Elu should be Elu, not Ella. Loinus Baru Bahemshech. Also, these questions were never answered in the Hemshech. They ain't Kamakeme. And here's not the place to go into. I never wrote anything about answers to the questions in the beginning of in Shavuos Tafresh Ayin Gimel. Firstly, because it's hard to figure out. I could not find enough clues as I did with the rest of it. Maybe I have to try a little harder. But I couldn't really figure out what would have been the answers because it's right in the middle of the Hemshech and there's no real way to know. But after he asked these questions, Admurnish Mose'edin, Chezer al Kama Mahashailas, he goes back to a number of the questions that he asked, Shashal B'tchilas HaHemshech. So interestingly, he goes back and repeats some of the questions that he asked all the way on page 1. We're talking now 127 chapters later, 126 chapters later. And I quote, Gam tzarich lahavin, he says. Ma she'amar Azal b'shal she'ikdimu Yisrael nasa l'nishma. So the Azal say, we all know this, Azal is the beginning of the Hemshech, that when they preface by saying nasa before nishma, Yardu malachi asharis, v'kishru lehem shnei ksarim. The angels, the ministering angels descended and they bound for them, they wove for them 2 crowns. V'tzarich lahavin b'zeh. The Rebbe Rashab repeats the question. V'aloi matzinu sheyesh gimel ksarim. Don't we find that there are 3 crowns? Who could the Isa, the Mishnah, the Avis, like it says in Pirkei Avos, in the Mishnah in Pirkei Avos? Gimel ksarim hein. There are 3 crowns. Keser Teira, Keser Kohana, v'Keser Malchus. The crown of Teira, the crown of priesthood, the crown of kingship. V'lama kishu lehem rak shnei ksarim. Why did they only weave for them 2 ksarim? And there it says there are 3 ksarim. Next page, 40. Uba Mishnah, the Avos gufet tzarich lahavin, and in the Mishnah of Avos, this is all the language of the Rebbe Rashab in the Maimer Sisar Shvuas Ayin Gimel, a year later from the Maimer B'Shal Shekdimu, that was the beginning of the Hemshech. In the Mishnah itself, we have to understand Halei b'Protius Cheshev Dalek Ksarim. Remember that question? When you break it down, doesn't he count 4 Ksarim? Keser Shemtev. The crown of the good name rises above them, above the 3 crowns. So he should have said there are 4 crowns. Why did he say there are only 3 crowns, not 4? Why does he say only 3 crowns when he actually enumerates 4? End quote. So he doesn't ask all the questions from the beginning of the Hemshech, but 2 of the 6 questions he does ask. The 2 crowns compared to 3, and why in the Mishnah itself it says 3 when it actually enumerates 4. So it's interesting that Rebbe Rashab chose to repeat those questions here in this Maimer. And the Rebbe Rashab then continues again in the Maimer Vasisa Chag Ashvus, Tafei Shayin Gimel, v'chezer edapam, and repeats a 3rd time, another time. Uma'atat tzarich lahavin. He begins that next section, Ayin Beis, and for now, now we need to understand Ma'u inyan hagimel ksarim keser teira, keser kuna, keser malchus. What is the inyan of these 3 crowns? And here again, he doesn't answer them. You'll soon see what I derive from that in a minute. V'hinei zeh lepela. This seems quite strange, or pella, quite wondrous. Shadmur nishma seiden, chezer gimel pamim al eisei inyan, shala gimel ksarim. He goes over the 3 ksarim 3 times in the beginning of Hemshech Ayin Beis and twice in this Maimer Vasisa Chag Shvuos. It's one thing. Why does he have to say 3 times? It's literally a repeat. He's asking the same question. But Oid Pella, another seemingly thing that needs is somewhat strange or wondrous. Shemiyad behemshech lezeh mamshich. That right after this, pointing out that we have to understand the 3 crowns, he continues and says the following quote: "Va'inyan hu." What's the inyan of these 3 ksarim? Dinim avur le'il. Move on. From what we explained earlier, it's understood the bechlolas hamshachas v'agalima ein sof baruch hu, that the general transmission and revelations of Ein Sof Baruch Hu, from Ein Sof Baruch Hu, yesh beis mini hamshachas. There are 2 tracks. Echad hamshachas shebechinas Ein Sof mamish. One is the track that's mamish Ein Sof, infinite, unlimited, undefined, unlimited, right? Va'beis, the second track is hamshacha shebechinas gvula midah, a track that is defined with parameters and measured. End quote. Umamshich lavayir barichus gdela, and then he continues to explain an elaborate arichus, elaborate discussion. Ahefresh ben beis hamshachas elu, the difference between these 2 transmissions. The eina chezer lavayir hagimel ksarim ba'hemshach shelefanenu kanal. and does not return to explain the three crowns in our Hemshach. But he does say, to understand the three crowns, we have to understand the two Hamshachas of Ein Sof and Gvul. So based on that, here's what I write. Omnom. However, even though he doesn't answer the question, Mehemshech hadvarim hanal mashma, from the flow, from the order of how he starts and says, now we have to understand the three crowns. And we'll understand them by first understanding the two Hamshachas of Ein Sof, of Bli Gvul and Gvul. Mashma, it appears, or I write, or it can appear, not sure how strong to make it, but either way, that there's a relationship between these two tracks, Ein Sof and Gvul, Ein Sof mamash Gvul amida lahabeis ksarim, to the two crowns, Echad Keneged Naisa, Echad Keneged Nishma. This again is either mashma or kaponim nida. It's my speculation, and obviously someone could disagree, but it's mashma when you read it from the flow. Because why is he saying it? All these repeats it three times and then begins with the two Hamshachas that there's a connection between the two tracks of Ein Sof and Gvul to the two crowns of Nasa, Keneged Nasa and Nishma. That's one thing. V'loy oid, and furthermore, however, these two tracks break into three. If you remember with Keser, he said there are two levels in Keser, and then one of them breaks into two, so it ends up being three. Like explained earlier in the end of the Maimer, the Vayigash Maimer, Pei Kuf Chavav, chapter 126 that we had already reviewed. Then the Hamshacha, in the form of the infinite Hamshacha, the unlimited one, quote, Gufa yesh beis madregas. In that itself, there are two levels. Echad k'moishu muvdal ma'er pnimi legamri, one that's completely removed from the er pnimi, v'abeis k'moishu bo b'chinas makif le'elmes v'ishtalshlus. And the second, the way one that relates as at least in a form of makif to the structure of existence. The two higher levels. The lowest level in Keser relates completely to the mid of a gvul. It's seviv, it's machtir and surrounds Atzilus. But the higher Ein Sof, he breaks into two levels. One completely removed, the shtika, and one that is not completely removed, but it's still makif, the Rotzon hanelam, Keser atara. Umamshich, v'zeu gimlin yonim hanal shebekeser. And he says, and these are the three levels that we're talking about in Keser. So here clearly you see two levels that break into three. So that's why I'm arguing, making the case that when he starts saying, to understand the three crowns, let's go back to the point, the two tracks of Ein Sof and Gvul. And furthermore, these two tracks are actually going to break into three, like he said earlier. Because the Ein Sof breaks into two levels. So now we also see a connection to three ksarim. I'm going to discuss this much more at length, what that means. But I'm just trying to build, like I said, this is Hagdama, preface, before we get back to the answer to the questions about two ksarim and three ksarim, and even the fourth keser and so on. This is critical because these are all hints to how the Rebbe Rashab is structuring the second section of Ayin Beis in this context.
Where is this Keser? In Atzilus or in Art?
I'm not sure where that question is coming from. What difference does it make?
He's talking about the Keser of such a high level, but Keser of what? In which place?
He just says Keser, so.
Even Koydem Atzimtzum?
Is there a Keser Kedem Atzimtzum, you're asking me? If there's a Keser Kedem Atzimtzum, it's also Kedem Atzimtzum. Generally speaking, Keser we talk about after the Tzimtzum. But Keser after the Tzimtzum in macrocosm is like the higher levels of Rotzon, Lifnei Tzimtzum. So the Lechera, I'm asking this. Seemingly, why does the Rebbe Rashab have to do it this way? Why doesn't he just say briefly, Leimer, she's Gimel Hamshachis, that there are three tracks, three transmissions, a Gimel Madregas, or three levels. B'mkeim lefaret she's Beis Hamshachis, instead of saying that there are two Hamshachis, v'hamshacha Beis yesh bo Gimel Madregas. And the second one breaks into two. Why don't you just say three in the first place? That's why it appears from the fact that he's doing it this way that we can say because he's hinting to what would ultimately become the answer, that the two tracks are connected, the two crowns, connected Nasav and Ishma. Habeis Perushim Ubchinas Bekeser. The first two meanings in the word and levels in Keser. Chitzenius HaKeser, Pnimius HaKeser. Arich and Atik. We don't say there are three levels in Keser, we say there's two. However, so the truth is we're talking about two general tracks. But when you break it down, in the higher level itself of Keser, there are two levels. And with that, we come and add a third Keser. Because Keser, especially as the Arizal says it, generally breaks into two, Atik and Arich. But if you break it down further, the higher level can break into two parts. And now we have a third Keser, HaKeser, Hagimel Ksarim Ba Mishnah, the Ovis, the three Ksarim that are enumerated in Pirkei Ovis, Keser Teira, Keser Kuna, Keser Malchus, in contrast to the two Ksarim that the Malachim wove for the Yidden by Matan Teira. And with this, it's also more elegant and nicer to see the flow. Canal. How the ideas flow in the beginning of this Maimer Shvuas Tafresh Ayin Gimel. Shemiyad la'achrei Agdama, right after he prefaces. Uma'ata tzarich lahavin ma'u inyan agimel ksarim keser teira keser kuna keser malchus. After he says, now we need to understand the three crowns. Mamshich, quote, va'inyan hudinim ma'avur li'il movin. And the inyan in that, in what? In the three ksarim, is from what we learned earlier. It's understood the b'cholos hamshachas v'agilum mein se baruch hu yesh beis mini hamshachas. That in general, the transmissions that come from Ein Sof have two transmissions, and the flow then is understood because the two transmissions break into three. So with that, we'll be able to understand what are the Gimel Ksarim. However, he still didn't answer the actual question. Achadayin sarich lahavin, but we still need to understand Hashaychus la'beis Ksarim connected Nasa, the connected Mishnah. What tak is the connection between Ein Sof, the Eira Ein Sof and the Eira Gvul, to these two crowns, Nasa and Nishma? V'gam habir l'shar hashaylos, and we also need to understand the explanation to the other questions that the Rebbe Rashab asked. V'gam, we also need to understand connected Eze Gimel Beis Ksarim Gimel Ksarim, which are the two Ksarim of the three, Keser Kuna, Teira, Kuhuna, Malchus, which are the two primary ones, and which is the one that breaks off? Which one? Hema Beis Minam Shachas Hanal, Ve'ez Mem Kol Keilul HaKeser HaGimel. So is it Keser Teira and Keser Kuhuna, and then one of those two break into the third one? Or is it the other way around? That's not spelled out either. So all that needs to be understood, and that will be explained as we go along. So what we just covered here was how we can derive from the Rebbe Rashab's flow and process and continuation, how he weaves it all together. We can derive certain ideas that we can then build upon and try to understand the questions that he left unanswered at the beginning of Ayin Beis. So that's what this section did. So we still need to answer the questions and a few other points that I just made right now. I think I'm going to stop here, but let me take any questions from you.
This is really fascinating. Question to you is, are these answers that you're going to come up with now? from Magbia Leshevis or your own answers?
No, they're not from Makif of Keser, and they're not my own. They're from other Maimorim. Some of it's from Samach Vov. Some of it is basically hinted to. I found a great gem. The day I found it was one of the biggest simchas in my life. In volume 3, one little parenthesis, the Rebbe Rashab mentions Keser Shem Tov. And you'll see how much you could learn just from a half a line, literally. And
oh, wow.
So, yeah, look, as I told you, I would never have written this essay if I did not feel that it's strong enough that I could feel comfortable saying it's not my own theories. Yes, I did build it together and I did calculate it all, but it's based on strong, strong foundations. And I published it, and I actually write in my essay at the end and the beginning, if anyone has any comments or any different way of interpreting or explaining, by all means. So far, I haven't heard from anyone. So I welcome, if any of you want to study it and research it and come back and say you have a different way of understanding it, I would be delighted to hear that. So I'm pretty confident saying that the way I structured it sounds very right. Am I ready to say that it's 1,000% or 100%? No, because obviously since the Rebbe Rashab didn't actually spell it out, but I have enough evidence here, I can make a good case for it. That's what I'm basically saying. So the next is not Makif of Keser, is based on Samach Vov, where he talks about the question, he answers the question of Nasa and Nishma there. And you'll see, it's very likely that it fits right in here. And as I said, the Rebbe Rashab himself hints to some of these things. You'll see, I spell it all out. Whenever I have a doubt, I write. You'll soon see a section where I write a whole piece that is this Al-Pi Svara or Al-Pi what it says in the Maimorim. I challenge myself in the essay itself, whether this is just makes sense or do I have any more proof? And then I bring some more proof. So, I mean, it's a case, what should I tell you? This is a research paper.
Wow. The chronological that you just explained today, I thought was very helpful for me. The fact that it was stopped and then the year, and then he picked up the questions, that clarified it for me a lot.
Yeah.
My question to you is that fourth Keser Shem Tov, I was going to ask about it, but you just referred to a line that Keser Shem Tov, because you only speak about 3 now until the fourth.
The essay is not over. We didn't answer the questions about
3. The 3.
What it began here laying out is that there's the 2 and the 3, basically. That, yes. Right. But it's also not a complete answer either, because why does Nasa and Nishma have to do with Ein Sof and Gvul? You'll see. It'll all come together in the next. It's a whole, this last chapter especially is a entire buildup of a lot of pieces here, moving pieces. So we're going to get back to the 3 and the 2, as well as the Keser Shem Tov as well.
Okay.
You're going to be quite surprised what Keser Shem Tov is when we conclude this. You'll see.
And you said that came from what line? That was one of the happiest days of your life. Where was that? Which mimer?
Volume 3 of all places, all the way at the end of the Hemshech. Volume 3. I was just reading it. I said Keser Shem Tov, that's one of the questions that's never answered. Then the Rebbe Rashab refers to it, and he says Kamoshi Isbar. I will explain it. In other words, he clearly was going to answer this question but there he gives us a good hint there. You can listen, you can peek ahead. There's no secrets here.
I'm still confused in understanding with 3 crowns. If they're the Ein Sof, the crown or crowns that are part of Ein Sof versus Gvul, I thought there were 2 that relate more to structure to Gvul, and one Atik, which is which relates.
The Rebbe Rashab wrote it the other way around.
I know, that's why I'm
relates to Gvul, and one is Ein Sof, and the Ein Sof itself breaks into 2.
I hear, and that's why I'm confused, because I thought yesterday we also talked about 3 crowns, and it seemed as though there was the highest, which was Bli Gvul, and the second one. I mean, they're all Bli Gvul, but relatively speaking, the lower 2 are more Makif, whereas sort of the middle one is a hybrid. It's like it's like thinking about relating to structure, but it's still bleak full, still relates to.
Okay, so
still is-
correct what you understood yesterday. Now you understand it better.
Well,
That the bleak
so-
wool has two parts to it, and then there's the third, lower level. You can break it either way. You could say you could bunch together the top two, the lower two, or you could bunch together the top two.
It's not that critical, I'm guessing, from what you're saying.
No, I mean the way I would say it most correctly would be there's two tracks, like Atik and Arich, and then two tracks, and then the higher track breaks into two.
And when you say the higher track, so you're saying there's Chitzonius Atik, which
I didn't
relates.
say that. I specifically didn't because the Rebbe Rashab didn't say that.
Okay,
It's
well,
possible. It's possible that it's that way, or there's a few ways you can break it down. But it's either way. It could be Arich Sheba Atik. There's a lot of ways to explain it.
Or like having, yeah, I got it.
It could be Chitzeni Atik and Primi Atik. He may even say that at some point. I didn't say it's not that. I just didn't want to say it definitively because he didn't say it yet. I have to look. Maybe he mentions it, but regardless, it's yeah.
I hear. Thank you.
But also in Arich itself, there are tracks, the Chitzenius and the Pneumius.
Everything has everything. There's for sure. There's scholars everywhere. There's Atik within Arich. And in Arich itself, there's Chitzenius Arich, Primius Arich. Yeah, correct.
Did you ever ask AI to answer the questions? This may be a silly question, but just
Go ahead.
wondering.
Why don't you try?
That's
I-
it.
No,
Did-
I did not, and I don't think it's going to answer the question.
Okay, a thought came to me, and yeah, okay.
Unless it has my essay in it, I don't think it'll be able to figure it out.
Mhm.
I'm not knocking it because it doesn't have enough to base it on. What's it going to base it on? It'll come up with some hallucination. You could
Yeah,
try.
yeah. No, I don't even know how to do it. I was just wondering.
But remember, AI has these videos of mine now, so it may use that.
Hmm. Okay, thank you,
What
Rabbi.
would
Yeah.
your question be? What would your question be to AI? Exactly what would your question be? I'd like
Another
to-
question would be, can you speculate? What would be the answer to the questions that the Rebbe Rashab did not answer in Ayin Beis? Which would mean AI would have to go through all of Ayin Beis and use its knowledge. It's hard for me to imagine that AI could do that without this essay or this class. It's very hard because this, but you know what? You could try it. I think it'll come up with something that makes sense, but it may not be at all true.
Well, it's certainly much more.
Like, would AI come up with Hamagbi L'Sheves to answer the questions that the
Right.
Rebbe Rashab doesn't answer about Nefesh Habamis and their mitzvah?
Of course not. Yeah.
No, I can't say of course not. Maybe one day it will. Once it's trained, I see it could do it. If you trained AI, look at other Maimorim that the Ayin Beis is built upon, and tell me how this could have developed, that I could see it doing. But it's hard for me to think that it would just figure that out on its own, find the Maimon Magbi. But you know what? Let's be surprised. Maybe
I mean,
Yitzchak,
it's much
when you
more
have a chance, you can try it out.
It's
I
much
have
more
a question.
fulfilling to do it this.
Let's put it this way. Even though I could have tried with AI, I didn't, because I didn't think the elaboration that I have here, I don't think AI is going to come up with.
Yes.
I
No.
don't think it.
There's
I
too
don't
much.
think I don't think it would work the way you said. I think you could ask it specific questions, like how does the Rebbe Rashab's introduction?
Anyway, you could try different questions and see how far you can get. It'd be interesting.
But don't you have your own AI, Rob Jacobson? Don't you have your
Personally, I
your
think that's
own
where you're
AI?
headed. I personally, I think that's where you're headed. And so, if I'm right, I think you probably already said it. That's where you're headed. We'll see. Then you could ask AI, what does it think? You have to ask it. You have to. It's all about the prompt. It's all about how you frame the question.
Exactly. Like, in other words, if you asked AI, based on the Maimer HaMagbil Shevis, which is the foundation of the end of Ayin Beis, can you tell me what would have been the answers to the following questions? What's Ner Mitzvah? What's the effect on the animal soul? What's Ner Mitzvah? What's Tereh What's Riyah? Even that, I'd be it would be quite surprising if AI came up with a good answer. But there you're giving it a very clear, directed prompt.
Yes. I've played around with that. It's hit or miss, but sometimes it does a pretty good job. Because I use it as a study tool.
I can't say what it will do. With that type of question, I could see maybe. But if you just said to it, tell me what would have been the conclusion of Ayin Beis based on your knowledge of everything, Chassidus.
No, couldn't do that.
It's hard for me to imagine I could do that at this point. But again, if remember these videos, I think AI has now already been trained with my videos, so it may draw from there. In other words, if someone did it, AI will find it, basically.
Exactly. When you have an answer, it can find the answer that already was discovered.
Yeah, we don't have to speculate. We could test it. Anyone, you guys can test it. Try it out. But I agree totally. It's all about the prompt, how you ask the question. You ask the question the wrong way, you're going to get complete nonsense. If you ask the right way, you can get brilliant stuff. 100%. I've seen that for sure.
But I have a question after the class will be over.
Let me stop the recording. So we're stopping now in middle of page 40. Yeah, middle of page 40.